Welcome to our New York Giants Preservation Society meeting for tonight, February 11th, 2026, with Rick Laughland. Rick has a brand new book called The Subway Series. Brand new. I think it came out last week. New York City's illustrious baseball tradition. We're going to get to Rick in a couple of minutes. Just want to wish everybody out there, especially Hindi, happy Valentine's Day, Hindi.
Thank you,
You're so welcome.
guys.
Uh, we will not have a meeting next week, but in 2 weeks tomorrow, we'll have Brad Mangan. Brad is a famous photographer of baseball. He's done some covers of Sports Illustrated and lots of San Francisco Giants. So I'm sure you'll see some of Willie Mays at Old Timers Day and some the trophies and Candlestick Park and Oracle Park. So that should be something to look forward to. But without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Rick Laughland. I got in touch with Rick a few years ago. He had a brand new book about the Nets that came out. I don't even know how I found them, but Rick at that time told me he was working on a book about the Subway Series between the Giants and the Yankees and the Dodgers and the Yankees. And now you might see a Yankees and Mets as we did, I believe, in 2000. So without any further ado, let's all give it up for Rick Laughland. Rick, the floor is yours. Do you need the screen are you share screening or are you just talking?
I might just talk, and I guess if it gets to that, I might share the screen if
You
that's all right.
got it. Floor is
Um,
yours. Welcome to the New York Giants Preservation Society.
well, thank you very much for that very warm welcome, Gary. And it's been a long road. Just to give you a little background and the other members, I had this project, of course, in the works now for a couple of years, and it was basically at completion. And there was a cancellation from a publisher because they went in a different direction. So I started kind of shopping this project idea when it was 95% done, kind of had to go back to the drawing board. Honestly, was a blessing in disguise. Very happy. Globe Peacock is the current publisher. It's under the umbrella of Rowan and Littlefield and Lions Press. And so I'm doing my book tour right now at 15 to 20 different Barnes and Noble. I can certainly email a list of the stores I'm going to be at, anywhere from Brooklyn to Staten Island to throughout New Jersey. And it was just on Monday at the Fifth Avenue store. And as Gary had mentioned, my first, if you want to call it, published book that's not self-published, that was in bookstores, was about the Nets, the history of the Nets from Teaneck to Brooklyn. And it follows this nomadic journey. I know there was a lot of chatter before the call of old time, NBA, and not so much ABA, but the Nets, of course, crossed over, part of the merger with the Nuggets and the Pacers, etc. So that was my first foray into novel writing or nonfiction, and I was very happy with the turnout as far as the book tour that was concerned. That's how I connected with a fellow member of yours, who's David German, and I think he provided an introduction to you, Gary, and to your group. So I'm so thankful to have made that happen. And I wanted to thank you as well, Gary, because you had connected with Carl Erskine, who I interviewed in this book, and brought me through some of those early years, especially his special connection he had with Jackie Robinson, and had an opportunity to interview and kind of pick his brain and get some of those stories before he passed on. So, just to give you a general, if you want to say an inspiration for, why did I go with this story route? There's been countless books, countless documentaries covering the Brooklyn Dodgers, the New York Giants, the New York Yankees, and just even within those franchises, the key figures from the DiMaggios to the Ruths to the Mays to the Robinson. One of the challenges I had was trying to do enough justice to not only the eras that these teams played in, the meetings, the 13 World Series meetings between 1921 and 1956, but covering enough of a span of a chronological era, starting, pre when the Subway Series when the subway wasn't even built. So it was, referred to as the Trolley Series. I try to interweave a lot of U.S. history, what was going on during that time in the late 1800s, going through the Gilded Age, the New Deal, and using that as a tie-in to the current events with how a lot of the players, whether, played overseas, whether it was for military baseball teams, whether it was serving overseas in the Korean War or the World War I or World War II. I felt that with the quincentennial, I think it's called. I always the 250 celebration. I can never get that quite correct, but with the 250 celebration being this year and for this being published now at the start of 26, I just felt it was great to honor not only those on diamond heroes, but the military heroes that kind of wore multiple hats, so to speak, right? From baseball caps to berets and etc. So that was kind of my inspiration for the book. You'll find if you end up purchasing the book that my late uncle, served during the Korean War in the Navy. He helped retrieve astronauts from space, and he also was involved with attacking the Viet Cong, and he was on the naval destroyer. And my late grandfather, was a paratrooper in World War II. So I have a nice little tribute to them, dedication in the book, and I just felt like it was important in this day and age when there's not so much a grasp for, I'm between generations. I'm not of your generation, and I'm not certainly up and coming young generation. I'm somewhere stuck in the middle where I grew up, having an appreciation for not only sports history, but U.S. history, world history in general. And it's kind of, I'm an educator too. I teach marketing courses at the collegiate level. And the lack of interest and understanding of history is alarming to me. And I wanted to, not that I wanted to force feed some U.S. history to any of the sports fans, but I felt like it was very appropriate and in line with what I was trying to do. So as you read the book and it goes on through these different seminal moments in U.S. history, I tie it in with what's going on in the baseball world. And so for me, like I said, that was really an inspiration for me, was to kind of bridge the gap between generations of what really was the origins of the Subway Series. We have a whole generation now that basically can vote that wasn't even around for the Mets and Yankees, the modern day Subway Series when that came around in 1997. Nevertheless, you're talking 1889 and Trolley Series and the meeting between the bridegrooms and Giants. So I felt it was important to tell this story, to give it some color with obviously Carl Erskine, who talks about his relationship with Jackie and how Jackie was so complimentary to him during spring training games and said, don't worry, from the stuff that you're throwing, I could see that you've got a tremendous career ahead of you. And there's no doubt in my mind that you're a big league player. And the camaraderie that he built with Jackie, and of course the social challenges that was going on at that time, Brown versus Board of Education, and all these groundbreaking rulings that paved the way for equality, not just on the baseball field, of course, but in the real world as well. I think is an important story to tell, and baseball being a diversion in a way, but also being a vehicle for social change, has been a constant throughout its existence and in modern day U.S. history as well. A couple of things that my takeaways from the book, and I had an opportunity to interview Bobby Valentine. He was kind enough to write a foreword for the book. Bill Rhoden, who's a New York Times best-selling author, wrote an endorsement for the book. One of the special treats was talking to Ed Randall, who, of course, growing up, and I'm sure for many of you as well, even predating my time listening to him on WFAN and reading his columns and books and shows at Talking Baseball with Ed Randall, he's a baseball encyclopedia. So I had a wonderful opportunity to sit down with him. I was covering an event at Yankee Stadium. And frankly, we had the TV on with the game in the back of an auxiliary press box. And he walked me through all those golden years and some of the not so golden years. Walter O'Malley and the famous story he tells with friends of his who were columnists, talking about comparing dictators to Walter O'Malley. And he really helped to give color and give some context to a lot of the things that you won't pick up necessarily from looking at Baseball Almanac or Baseball Reference. So very fortunate in that regard to be able to have some connections through my time covering. I spent time covering the Mets, the New York Giants, the baseball team, the football team, I should say, New York Football Giants, the Jets, as well as on the basketball side. So there's just something special, and always hold a special place in my heart about baseball. The book that I wrote about the Nets really is a unique story. They played in 8 different arenas. It's the most in any pro North American sports. You don't think of the Nets as being nomadic, but they were. So that story alone is very intriguing and unique. But the sport of baseball, with its rich history and being so stat driven, and really just a cerebral fan base, it lends itself to long form books like this. And I really do. My hope is that it will reach audiences both young and old and bridge the gap of generations. So I don't know as far as how in depth, if you want me to go chapter and verse through, where I go with the book, Gary, or
Now, Rick,
where
why
you'd
don't
like
you
me to head.
explain what you did as far as the chapters are? You know what I mean? You don't have to go
Sure.
over each one, but I assume you're going over each uh, series that took place between the New York teams.
Correct. Yeah. So between, as again, I don't have to tell you, between 1921 and 1956, 13 meetings, 7 between the Dodgers and Yankees, and 6 between the New York Giants and Yankees. That's, the crux of the early portion, if you want to call it the first half of the book. The beginning of the book starts predating the Subway series, which they unofficially refer to as the Trolley series era. And that runs from 1889 to 1903. And that's really before the Highlanders come into the picture. It's Brooklyn Dodgers, it's New York Giants, show of the town, and then this third team, who the heck are they, kind of changes the whole landscape of baseball in New York City at that time. And I delineate that chapter, which is the opening chapter, chapter 1, from chapter 2, which is Subway Series origins. So that runs all the way from 1903 up through 1957, with, of course, the Giants and Dodgers leaving town. And that is really what I refer to as the golden era. And I go into the pennant battles between the Dodgers and Giants, the meetings between the early dominance of the Giants over the Yankees in the 20s, and then the kind of the changing of the guard, where those great 20s Yankees teams kind of start taking the mantle and running away with it, and the Dodgers finally breaking through, of course, in 1955. And then kind of an anticlimactic end to that run, in 1957, with 1 foot in the door and 1 foot out. And it not being, even though the Subway Series was played in New York City every year between 1921 and 1957. Of course, 57 didn't involve the Dodgers or the Giants, still had the Yankees in it, so it was played in New York. It was kind of an anticlimactic end to what was just a golden era of New York City baseball. And then I segue from that into the post 3-team era, which I call the Exodus, when the Giants and Dodgers are leaving. And it's a short but sweet chapter. It talks about, obviously, the ownership's directive now to go to the West Coast, the void that's left behind in New York City, and the Yankees really being the only show in town. And then that kind of moves its way into William Shea and Branch Rickey, of course, creating, if you want to, coercing MLB into awarding them an expansion team, which eventually became the Mets. So all of the groundwork that those two instrumental, in the case of Shea being an attorney and Branch Rickey being a successful executive, being able to forge a path for another NL baseball team to come back to New York City. And then, as things move along, and I start to get, of course, into the Mayor's Trophy era, which, of course, was played back in the day. I cover it more in depth in chapter 6, where it does the 1963 to 79. Then there's a short hiatus, and they go from 82, 83, and then it kind of the luster on the star starts to dull a little bit, and there's not the interest in those games wane. And then there's that 14-year hiatus between when the Mets, of course, and the Yankees start interleague play. And it really culminates with those Yankees teams, when the dynasty, really the budding of that, 96 dynasty, of course, knocking on the door in 95, and then busting through it in 96, 98, 99, 2000, and how that slow buildup, the 1997 Dave Malicki, shutout, 9-inning shutout game, is just really like just a fever pitch. Things reach a fever pitch at Yankee Stadium. And I was very young during that time, 12, 13 years of age. And I could just feel the buzz and excitement. And I just never captured the essence of why it was so significant. My father, who grew up actually in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and grew up watching the Pirates, but had moved to Chicago and then eventually New Jersey, had become a Yankee fan, but it always had told me, whether it was listening on the radio at first or eventually watching on TV, that it seemed every year it was Dodgers, Giants, Yankees, Giants playing while he was at school. The games were played during the day. And once I've read countless books now. I've done a lot of research, having talked to firsthand accounts, whether it's Carl Erskine or Ed Randall. I really felt bridging that timeline and kind of telling the story from start to finish. But again, my challenge really was the fact that I couldn't go into as much detail as I wanted to about each individual player from Mays to Mantle to Robinson. But I tried to cover them in enough depth and to honor their legacy on and off the diamond, to hopefully do them justice. So that was something I grappled with during the writing process. So again, if you want to call it, the climax of the book is the 2000 Subway World Series and the significance of that, and the sideshow that became the Roger Clemens and Piazza dust up, that you get firsthand accounts from Bobby Valentine and from Steve Phillips about that whole exchange, how the bad blood started to boil there. And there's some interesting thoughts that both, oddly enough, both Steve Phillips and Bobby Valentine butted heads a lot, right? I think they've, since reconciled and have come to a mutual understanding, but they both seem to come out the same way regarding the Piazza and Clemens ordeal, was that they were thankful. A lot of Mets fans, even some Yankee fans, and just unbiased baseball observers had said, why didn't Piazza charge the mound, and why didn't well, they both came out was that would have hurt the Mets a heck of a lot more than, if Clemens got suspended and Piazza got suspended, that would hurt the Mets a heck of a lot more than it would have hurt the Yankees. So they felt by him keeping it cool and maybe not escalating things, it kept things under control. But again, people can have differing opinions on that. But it was interesting to get kind of firsthand accounts of that, and walk me through some of the great moments throughout that Subway series. And again, as everyone's fully aware, a lot of momentum. There was kind of a lull when you're talking the late 2008, and even Bobby Valentine alludes to in the book that he even felt by 2001 that the interleague play, specifically Mets and Yankees, started to get played out just a little bit, that he felt it was 2 games too many. Maybe they should have played two-game series or 1 3-game series. When it eventually expanded to 6 games, he felt it was too much. And that kind of started to play out its string. And the Yankees, of course, kind of coming back down to earth after that 2009 World Championship. And the Mets, of course, being, making back-to-back playoffs for the first time in 99, 2000. Then they do it again in 2015, 2016. They've not been exactly a model of consistency as far as playoff berths are concerned. But things have ratcheted up, of course, with Juan Soto now signing across town. And that ruffling a lot of feathers, whether that's hurt the Mets more than it's helped them, or maybe in a way helped the Yankees, have been a blessing in disguise. I think the verdict is still out on that. But here we are now, 100 and basically 43 years later, and baseball, maybe to some, if you were to, interview some of the people from back then and show them some way, somehow, what the game has become with pitch clock and with all the changes, some of them would say it's unrecognizable, but the one constant has been that just battle for New York City baseball supremacy, and it hasn't waned. There's been periods during the Mayor's Trophy era where there was ho hum. Then they start the regular season meetings in '97. It reaches a fever pitch in 2000. It carries some momentum into the mid 2000s, and then that kind of wanes. But things the last 5+ years, pre-COVID, and even through a very difficult time at COVID. It's funny, some of the chapters, and many of you probably were watching, but they played those, 7 innings shortened doubleheader games that they wanted to shorten the length of the game because for safety protocols. And they, of course, instituted the pitch clock eventually, but they were playing, the Mets hit a walk-off home run in Yankee Stadium as the quote unquote the home team with no fans there. So it's like a very bizarre moment in the history of the game, and certainly in the history of the rivalry. But certainly, as far as the television ratings, people listening on the radio and following, I don't think fan interest waned. It was just kind of more of a bizarre asterisk, if you want to call it that, era or season due to COVID-19. So a lot of interesting things. Like I said, I not that I consider myself a 100% a baseball historian, but I've really tried to research and read books growing up and through my adulthood, and following these teams professionally, covering them. But I learned a lot that, again, you wouldn't exactly learn from a baseball encyclopedia or baseball almanac, talking to Ed Randall, talking to Carl Erskine, talking to Bobby Valentine, who has ties with the Mets going back to the early 80s, and even Steve Phillips as far as asset management. You know, he talks about the summer and when he went on the Mike and the Mad Dog program. I guess they were hosting it at a hotel not far from Shea Stadium at the time, and saying that everybody thought he was the toast of the town because Roberto Alomar and Jeremy Burnitz and Mo Vaughn, and this is unbelievable. How could you pull off these moves? And then he jokes that he went from the village idiot to the toast of the town to the village idiot again because he didn't have any type of exit strategy with those moves that he made to get those former all-stars that were, you know, on the downhill side of their career. So lot of interesting insights, and he goes into the saga of Alex Rodriguez and how close he was to becoming a New York Met. When you know he basically indicates that from Alex and his agent's perspective, they were interested. They wanted basically, you know, they wanted everything in the kitchen sink, and they were going to get that from the Rangers. As far as, you know, they wanted his input to be valued as far as the farm system. They wanted to show him the scouting reports. They wanted him to be able to sell A-Rod merchandise, all these things that I think Steve Phillips had famously in one of the, maybe it was Joe Torre's book or another book, had, you know, said, I can't do the 43-1 concept, which basically meant he couldn't treat Alex Rodriguez any differently than any of the guys in the clubhouse. That was his philosophy as a general manager. And he argued and contended that he had one of the lowest maintenance superstars in Mike Piazza. How could I do this and give this all this special treatment to Alex Rodriguez? So he ultimately said, you know, thanks, but no thanks. There was some disagreement among ownership at the time between, you know, Doubleday and Wilpons. Maybe should we go back with a counter offer? They decided not to. So that's always been an alternate, you know, an alternate Mets history. What would life have been with Alex Rodriguez? But from the Mets perspective, at least Steve Phillips, who was controlling that front office, it was not something that he was willing to go down. So there's a lot of, you know, fun nuggets, great anecdotes in there, great insights. Even during the 2000 Subway Series, I think it was after Game 4, if I'm not mistaken. Well, first off, after Game 2, when the Piazza and the Roger Clemens incident happens, going into Game 3, there is a workout room in Shea Stadium, and Phillips is most famous. I won't give away too much here, but you know, he's most famous for not allowing the Yankees into the Mets weight room, which was located beyond the home clubhouse. And he had his reasons for doing that, but maybe would have been misconstrued. He said, you know, to publicly, maybe he thought that other people thought it was Bush League, but he kind of clarifies what his thinking was behind that. And yeah, there's a lot of, and Susan Waldman gives funny accounts as far as the, you know, George Steinbrenner not liking the furniture that was at Shea Stadium during that series and bringing in his own stadium. And eventually there's a flood and the furniture gets destroyed and the visiting clubhouse is destroyed. And there's speculation, well, were the Mets playing games? Are they doing this on purpose? And after the series is over, it's over in 5. The Yankees win. George Steinbrenner, you have, you know, Wilpons going to George to say, well, what about your furniture? And George said, no, you can keep it. We'll get new stuff. So really just kind of humorous little anecdotes there that add color to the story and the timeline and add a little bit more juice to a rivalry that, again, based on those origins that I talked about going back to the 1800s and certainly when the Highlanders, the Yankees came into the picture in the early 20th century, you know, it adds a lot of color to that. So, like I said, I'm hoping this is seen as really a timepiece in New York City history and a baseball historical account, because my hope was to hopefully effectively interweave the history of what I would still say, despite some issues, the greatest city in the history of the world, how it evolved and how it got through some very trying times economically, politically, socially. That they're facing new challenges now, as is everyone in humanity. But the constant was they were able to, you know, whether it was world wars or whether it was the Great Depression or whether it was other issues, baseball was always there as a constant, a diversion from some of these difficult things going on. So, yeah, that's like I said, that's the long and short of it for me, Gary. Unless there's any questions.
Rick, where is the best place to get the book?
So yeah, the book is available anywhere books are sold. Really, Barnes and Noble for sure carries it. If you go online or you go in person, it's available on Amazon as well. And then my publisher is you can go to lionspress.com, I believe. It's Globe Peacock, which is an imprint of Lions Press. That is also a place to purchase it as well.
Okay, couple of things. First of all, I should have done this earlier. I want to welcome all the Sabre members from the various groups in the Northeast who are attending tonight. Thank you. If anybody's interested in joining us on a permanent basis or semi-permanent basis, just email me. Rick, before I ask my questions, we have a lot of people here who aren't in this vicinity. Can you just tell them quickly what the Mayor's Trophy is?
Well, the Mayor's Trophy, again, as it started, became exhibition contests that were, in a way, like glorified exhibition contests originally, right? And it revolved around the three teams at the time. First, it was Dodgers Giants, then eventually the Yankees and Dodgers kind of took the mantle and ran with it. And its initial introduction was a short-lived kind of experiment, if you want to call it that. And then it went on hiatus up until the early Mayor's Trophy era, which is the revival era, I call it, in the early 60s, 1963 to 79. Tried to add a little bit of juice and excitement, and there was life to it. Like Bobby Valentine said, there was life to it. It was, a spring training game on steroids. It was an exhibition game on steroids. But like Carl Erskine would said, it's funny because I asked him the differences between, those World Series meeting with the Yankees, where you're not, just playing for pride, you're playing for a trophy. To give me the differences between those World Series meeting with the Yankees or the critical pennant race meetings in the regular season with the Giants. And from what I took from his comments, he would say it almost meant more to him to play the Giants. It was a different type of competition. And he would use the word pride was on the line. He used a couple other, colorful language too, that basically it meant, even though it was the ultimate prize you were playing for in the World Series, beating the Giants and playing well against them meant more to him in a Dodger uniform than anything. So I think that's the kind of the catalyst for some of those Mayor's Trophies games was the origins of the bad blood between those two NL teams.
Now the cover I love. Did you have to get permission from the subway, New York City subway system? Because you see these signs everywhere when you're in Manhattan, and it's a great cover.
Good. I'm very happy. I was very pleased with it too. No, we didn't. Whatever permission needed to be, that was, the graphic designers with the publisher. So I was very pleased with how it came out. And I was, like I said, I wanted to include obviously from the era of yesteryear, but also the Piazza and Derek Jeter and Andy Pettitte, getting them on the cover. I felt was important because they were the poster children of that, 90s to early 2000s rivalry.
Okay, and just so you know, your picture's gone.
Oh.
Two other quick questions. During your studies, did you feel the 1951 Giant Yankee World Series was sort of anticlimactic after the Thompson home run? And as much as most of the people here can't stand the Dodgers, I mean, that 1955 when they finally won it, I mean, I just couldn't even imagine living in Brooklyn at that time and celebrating along with the team.
Yeah, that it's just like I said, and I wasn't alive during that time. My father, who, was very young, 5, 6 years old, really probably didn't even recollect it. But for me, I got chills just even doing the research and hearing Carl Erskine. It's funny, he talked about when the Dodgers left, it was almost like your girlfriend was leaving you, and it was like, well, we don't love you anymore anyway. There was such a special connection between the Dodgers, the players, and the fans, and they just embodied everything that was the fabric of Brooklyn, that just blue collar work ethic, the down lunch pail mentality, and when the idea that they were going to move 2,000 miles away is just, like Ed Randall says, is just unbelievable. It wasn't like they're going to play at the Yale Bowl in the case of the Giants, or the Nets are going to move out of New Jersey, move to Brooklyn. You have to pay the toll. This was an entirely different type of proposition. So yeah, it was just it's storybook. It's just you experience every emotion because the storybook nature of that 1955 season, and going up 2-0 in that 1956 World Series, looking like you're going to go back to back, and then having that slip out of your grasp. But the Giants. Yankees, the Giants, Dodgers, and Giants Yankees series were just incredible. And the 51 World Series, which I believe was the first to be telecast nationally, again, to your point, yeah, with the Bobby Thompson home run was a bit anticlimactic, but still special in its own right. As an unbiased observer, if you want to call it that, I somehow just gravitated to this underdog, this Brooklyn, the lovable losers. That kind of just spoke to me. For some of the teams that I followed growing up, whether it's the Nets, the Mets, or the Jets, they've always been that underdog, the redheaded stepsister child of the New York sports scene. So I just emotionally, personally gravitated towards that. Not that it's any better of a story than what the New York Giants accomplished, but yeah, just really really special connection that the Dodgers formed with the fans in Brooklyn. And it's funny because having written the book about the history of the Nets, and I was actually at the game the other night. Julius Erving was there along with Brian Taylor. I interviewed for my book, and there's a new ABA documentary, Soul Power, talks about the ABA and the upstart league, and of course the New York Nets and Pacers and Nuggets, etc. But there's not that connection between the Nets and Brooklyn, not even in the same stratosphere as there was between the Dodgers and their fans in Brooklyn. So it's just funny to see things come not even full circle,
yeah.
but yeah, just a little bit bizarre, kind of a juxtaposition there.
Well, best of luck with the book. Steve Rothschild, you were up.
Oh, I'm first. Wow. Must have been a good move. Great story. It's always nice when somebody younger goes into the history of what happened in the past. Living in New York most of my life, I certainly remember a lot of this, then moving and the beginning of the Nets and the West Coast stuff. Couple of quick questions. Did you try to get to Rachel Robinson?
No, I did not. Yeah, I tried. Like I said, unfortunately, I've used what resources I had and on the list, but did not get. No.
Oh, I fully understand. The three sites, Ebbets Field, the Polo Grounds, and of course the Highlanders played where Columbia Presbyterian is now. Have you visited those spots?
I did. Yeah, I know that your group did the walking tour, I believe, right? The Polo Grounds. I've walked around, the site of where it was, and of course, Ebbets Field is a stone's throw away where the Nets currently play. So I have been and seen the actual, commemoration of where it was. And yeah, I mean, like I said, it's funny because the Nets you would think would to market themselves, would market themselves as the first professional team in Brooklyn since 1957. They've done such a terrible job of marketing themselves. They left their roots are in New Jersey. They started in the Teaneck Armory in 1967, and then of course played in New York, and then played in Rutgers upon the move to the NBA. And they didn't use that as kind of leverage, marketing leverage, to say we're the first professional team in Brooklyn. But I have visited by those sites, and I would like to go again more in depth. It was before and after Yankee games and Nets games, trying to beat the traffic.
It's ironic because that's basically where O'Malley wanted to move, and I believe that the Nets' first pick, I went to college with Barry Leibowitz. I went to LAU. We went to school at the same. He was one year ahead of me. And the last thing is, did you did you at all address the fact that Jackie did not play Game 7 of 1955 World Series?
Yes, I did. I did address that he sat.
There's a lot of sides to that one. Don't want to go into that here, but thank you so much and look forward to reading your book. Good luck.
Thank you very much. And one aside to that, it's funny, my Nets book, you might find this interesting, is Herb Turetsky. I had a college roommate, and he told me his dad was a scorekeeper for the Nets. And he said, "Well, he's the backup." And I said, "Okay, so does he score a lot of games?" He said, "No, the guy that scores it never really misses a game." I said, "Okay, that's a little unusual, but my dad does Seton Hall." So I got the research going for my Nets book, and I connected with Herb Turetsky, who was the scorekeeper for the Nets. Right. Lo and behold, I sit down and talk to him. He set a Guinness Book of World Records. He scored the first game ever for the then New Jersey Americans in 1967 at the Teaneck Armory. And he was there up and through April of 2021, 2,200 consecutive games. So it's just funny when you get into the research of it. That's why his dad never scored a Nets game, but just a little aside for you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Steve. Mr. Romo, you're up.
Thanks, Gary. Hey, this is fantastic. I love listening to what you have to say about this book, and one thing I absolutely love is I love history and I love baseball, and it sounds like you can combine both of them, which is fantastic. Because look, history is important, And I think the more that we know about our history, the more that, the better the country can be, right? Question, your love of baseball, to be able to write a book like this, you have to have an incredible love for the game. How did you get that love for the game? Was it passed on from your father, your grandfather, or was it just something that just grew on you?
Yeah, it's very good question. Thank you. And yeah, I mean, so my dad had coached a lot of my little league teams. Okay, I grew up playing very competitive little league teams. Okay, some great coaches, some coaches would play you, some wouldn't. Always just following my dad's lead in little league, and kind of grew a passion for it, and played up through. But really, I enjoyed the analytical side as far as the statistics and baseball card collecting and all the history that went along with it. And of course, as a young child, 12 or 13 years of age, I believe, going up to Vermont and passing through, making a pit stop at Cooperstown, just really brought things to light for me. So I enjoyed playing it. It was fun. I really, if you want to say as far as playing the sport, I played basketball on a higher level, and I did that in high school, and was going to play Division III in college, elected not to. But the appreciation for the history of the sport just came from that, just from learning the game from my father and great little league coaches I had, understanding the history of MLB, of course, and the Negro Leagues, which now it's a great thing that they, of course, adopted some of those records and put those in. And that just really grew with each passing year, because one of the things I'll say, about some of the other leagues, the NFL is pretty good with this, but the NBA, honoring their history, talked about the Nets, don't really do a terrific job of that. So, yeah, that's kind of my inspiration for it, was just baseball is living, breathing history. And that I allude to that in the book.
Thank you, Eric. Mr. Mars.
Thank you, Rick, for joining us. I have three questions. The first one, I'd like you to verify. I believe I went to the first Mayor's Trophy game. It was a night game at Yankee Stadium. I believe it was on a Friday night. I'm thinking it was 1960. I think that was the first, if you could verify that. I remember Bob Bolin starting the game. I think each pitcher only threw about 3 innings or so. Can you verify that? My second question is, have you read a definitive book on 1920s baseball in New York called The Giants and Yankees in the Battle for Supremacy in New York? And my third question is, I believe you mentioned you're at the collegiate level teaching history. Is that correct?
So I'm actually teaching sports events, and I teach a couple of different disciplines. My current course is sports events and marketing, because I grew up with a marketing background, of course, intersection of sports. I covered a lot of different sports, like the New York Football Giants and the Mets. I was on the field when the Kansas City Royals were parading the 2015 trophy. I was there in the press box for games 3, 4, and 5. So I tried to use that experience in sports, and for marketing purposes for my personal brand, and how that can launch yourself in a career in sports marketing. So I'm teaching sports events and marketing. I've taught content marketing and social media marketing as well. So that's my background. To answer your question about the 1960, because they basically refer to there was basically the Mayor's Trophy era that I consider is the 1963-79 to 82-83. And that was basically Yankees Mets. There was this like interlude period, which I think you're referring to, which would have been the 1958 to 62, which I cover. But I don't really classify those as like the quote unquote Mayor's Trophy games. And even that, that's kind of, I followed the lead of, Baseball Reference and other sites that kind of delineated that. So even though you could consider those, it was more of an interlude because the Mets weren't there. That makes sense.
See. Well, relating to history, years ago, I spoke to two high school teachers, two history teachers that taught on the high school level. And I say, when I talk to some young people, they don't seem to have a sense of history. Some of them can't even tell me who was the first and 16th president. And we all knew that. We may not have known the second to the 15th, but it was common knowledge in elementary school to know, the first and the 16th, and not only those presidents, but a lot of other world events, and about the World War I, World War II, the Civil War, the Revolutionary War. And can you explain? Well, apparently the high school teachers told me that dates are not important, but the governments are, the governments of those nations that went to war. Can you explain perhaps why young people, is it the curriculum or or is it even in the curriculum about the Great Wars?
I think from what I'm seeing in the advent of social media and electronic devices, it's become a shortened attention span. In my class, my course is built around a Super Bowl RFP. So essentially, every team picks a host city and a venue for them to host the Super Bowl. They respond to an actual request for proposal where they have to fill out all this criteria, and they convince me as the NFL why I'm picking you as the host city. What I have noticed at the collegiate level, I haven't taught in high school or middle school or grade school, but is that, when I'm up lecturing and I'm going through dates or specifics or bullet points, it's the attention is just drops off. But where things pick up and they kind of tend to learn is from each other doing group activities and exercises. So whether that's trying to do different, questionnaires and have them work on an in-class activity, they do well with that. So to answer your question, I don't truly know why they're so fascinated. It seems as though like the specifics as far as dates and people and presidents from 1st to 16th doesn't interest them as much as like they want the Cliff Notes version. What's the abridged version? I don't need to know every event that happened. World War II started on this date, it ended on this date, and then the Treaty of Versailles, et cetera. They don't care about that. They want the overarching theme or the big takeaway. So maybe they can answer a trivia question, right? A trivia night. Maybe they can impress a friend. I don't know. There's just not that zest or this thirst for knowledge for, like you said, for history or for world wars. I
So
can't
is
see.
so do they not read books on it, or they just read Cliff Notes, a
They just, yeah,
synopsis?
everything. And now with AI becoming, to really taking everything over, which is funny, I wrote my book just, like entirely without AI. I mean, I didn't even consult it at all. I found it funny once it was finalized, it was in print, it was ready to go. And I just Google, how many, World Series of the Yankees win knowing the answer in AI, and it would be incorrect because it just aggregates information from any source, whether it's vetted, whether it's Joe Schmo in his pajamas that's never seen a baseball game putting it. So unfortunately, what I find, and this penetrates our political sphere, our social sphere, is that we're in the age of disinformation where there's so much bad information out there and they're not getting it from historians, whether it's political or US history historians or baseball historians. They're getting it from these third-party sources online that aren't vetted, don't have the credentials or resumes to be writing as subject matter experts. And yeah, they're often just getting the key bullet points or takeaways, and frankly, not even getting it right 100% of the time. So, yeah, to your point, that they aren't reading books, and I think that's a huge problem.
Thank you,
Thank you, Rick.
Mars.
Thank you, Rick.
Rick, just so you know, you're off again. We just see the
Oh,
letter
sorry,
R there.
sorry.
Harvey,
Oh,
you're up.
Rick, thanks for taking us a little bit down memory lane. I got two comments and two vignettes that I experienced directly. I grew up in the Bronx, a Giants fan. I'm still a Giants fan. I saw my first game July 10th, 1954. I was 8. You do the arithmetic. I just turned 80.
Cool.
But I want to bring it a little bit into the 20th century, at least. The first vignette was, I've met Bobby Thompson along with my dear wife, Helen, and she grew up in Brooklyn, a Dodgers fan. And we were having dinner with Bobby at a dinner in Staten Island. And Helen turns to Bobby and says, Bobby, I got to tell you something. I grew up a Dodgers fan. And Bobby smiles and said, that's all right, dear. My father was a Dodgers fan. And then he turns to me and says, until I signed with the Giants.
That's interesting.
The second, and that's a wonderful moment. It brings back Bobby's home run in 1951. The second little vignette is around 1981. I was attending a game at Yankee Stadium on a Sunday evening. If you remember 1981, was it? Well, you don't remember because I don't think you were born, Rick. When were you born, by the way?
I was born. I just turned 40, so my father's 80. He just turned 81. I'm 40, and yeah, he's 81. So,
Well, I was at a football game of the New York Football Giants that Sunday afternoon, and I sped out. The Giants were playing the Cardinals and beat the Cardinals. I managed to get to the ballpark, and a friend of mine was working for the Yankees, Donnie McGuire, and I went back to visit him. He was in a special VIP area, and I went back to this area between innings. It was right behind home plate. And I walk into this room, and there was only one other person in the room, and it was Pee Wee Reese.
Oh.
And I recognized him right away. And I was wearing my New York Giants hat, orange and black. And I could see Pee Wee's looking at my hat because I learned to follow the eye contact. And I extended my hand and I said, Pee Wee? And I said, I'm a Giants fan. I hope you're not offended by seeing the Giants logo. And Pee Wee said to me, no, not at all. How long has it been? How long had it been since they moved out of New York? And the two of us stumbled and bumbled trying to do the arithmetic. And then Pee Wee Reese, he told me he had been in the dugout before the game. He was carrying a bag of bats. And if you recall, well, again, Pee Wee was working for Louisville Slugger Bats. And he had a bag of bats with him. And he said he had been in the Yankee dugout and he was talking about how many World Series. He was reminiscing about the Dodgers 55 World Series. And then he says, and Yogi Berra had to inject himself and say the Yankees had won 5 or 6 or 26 or how many World Series they won. And then he did Pee Wee Reese did an imitation of Yogi Berra. And I'm looking around and I'm thinking to myself, this is priceless. So I don't want the conversation to end, and I asked the easy question. Pee Wee, who do you think is going to win the series? By the way, the Yankees were playing Oakland. It was a split season that year because of the strike. And Pee Wee Reese actually, again, picture this. There's only 2 people in this huge room, me and Pee Wee Reese. And he grabs onto my shirt and he pulls me closer and he says, I hate to say this, but the Yankees. Now, what he was hearkening back to was a time, this may be hard to believe, but the National League was separate from the American League. There wasn't interleague play. And when the World Series came around, National League fans, even though I hated the Dodgers, you rooted for the National League team against the American League team. It was a little bit of American history there. But that's my personal contact. I got a lot more stories, but I don't want to take up the time. Maybe Mars will jump back in again.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Harvey. John Burbridge, you're up. John, you're muted.
What Gary and Harvey just said. We rooted for the Dodgers in the World Series, even though we were Giants fans. In '55, I was overjoyed to see them beat the Yankees because we really hated the Yankees, even more so than the Dodgers. The second thing, and Gary mentioned the '51 World Series, and it might have been anticlimactic, but the Giants won the first game. Coswell, 5-1, and then they lose to Lopat. And then Psyche nicked the ball out of Rizzuto's hand on Saturday. We're up 2-1. We've got Magley going on Sunday. And what happens? A rain out. And that rain out screwed up the whole World Series for the Giants. They lose the next day 13-1. It's the most memorable World Series that I ever had. Rick, I just thank you for joining us. I'm a Mets fan. I can't believe somebody wrote a history about the Mets. Okay? I was a teacher at Rutgers in the 70s. Rutgers, the Mets were playing at the Rack. and I would teach my evening class and go over and catch the second half of the Mets game. It was great. And the other thing about, I don't know if you captured this in your book, it was like a college gymnasium. You could interact with the players after the games. And in fact, when they made the playoffs, Kevin Locker was the coach. We actually got to go into the locker room afterward and celebrate with them. Did you capture that, the RAC experience in your book about the Mets?
I did try that, yeah, how that collegiate atmosphere on top of the court, and to your point, that surprising success they had in that first year after the merger to make the playoffs in lottery, and I believe Phil Jackson, wasn't he on a couple of those teams as well, and then became obviously a transition to player coach and whatnot, and he was, I don't know, 37 years of age, breaking down at that point. But yeah, it was just like a lot of the Nets history, which you could speak to, of course. It just always what's that next thing? Can never find stability. And even now, what are they, 12 years later in Brooklyn since 2012, 13, 14 years later in Brooklyn, like doesn't even still feel like they've, made inroads in Brooklyn and developed a loyal fan base or season ticket holder group. It's just, it's almost like, where are they going to move next? Are they going to go full circle back to Teaneck, New Jersey or Long Island? With what I know about that team, I would never rule out another change in host city or venue. It's just nobody seems to wrap their arms around them except for those the end of the ABA era, 74, 75, 76. But the merger was coming, and it kind of put a little of a damper on the end of that 75, 76 season.
Can I would like to buy that Nets book for my son. He's a big Nets fan, and get you to autograph it. Can you?
Sure. Yeah. If you want, Gary, I have a couple copies Rick, I could sign and send to you. If you want to give Gary your information or email me.
Rick, I'll give John your email. Is that okay?
Perfect. I'll email Gary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate it.
Sure.
And Mars, I know you're out there in California, but I saw Rick Barry here in the Comac Arena for the New York Nets, which it turned, after they condemned the place, it became a flea market. That's how bad this arena was. So
when he was with the Oakland Oaks and they won the ABA title, he didn't play in that series because earlier in that year, you maybe remember, but like he tore his ACL going against the hockey boards at Comac Arena. Yeah. And then he ended up getting traded to the Nets. So it's just crazy.
Well, Freer, you're up, Ed.
I had the presentation, couple of reasons. Back 1955 World Series, the main thing I remember is coming home from school and being able to watch it on TV, which is long gone, watching it on TV. Another note is I really enjoyed the Subway Series when it first started with the Mets and the Yankees. That was like a big event. And I got to play a round of golf with Rick Barry, a very competitive player. So that was interesting. But my question is on the social history. 1957 versus 2000. You alluded earlier in your talk to the blue-collar work ethic. Do you, in your book or any presentation right now, see a difference between the 1957 city of New York and the 2001 or even 2026 city of New York from a social standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, so again, that was just before the civil rights movement and everything that came with that, the 57 season. I know there was a lot, and that's to O'Malley. I know O'Malley and Stoneham get a lot of flack, deservedly so, but they did face a lot of hurdles as far as red tape and bureaucracies and trying to get a stadium built and approvals. So of course they should have seen that through or tried to make something work. But there's some of the same political hurdles and bureaucracies in New York City has been stronger than ever. But it's funny because the 2000 Subway Series, I talk about following that series and going to 2001, where the Mets are championship hopefuls and crash and burn, and the Yankees, of course, go to Game 7 against the Diamondbacks and give New Yorkers a wild run all the way to that final inning, and that's in the aftermath of 9/11. So, in the 50s, obviously after the Korean War and before Vietnam, patriotism is running relatively high, and then you see an uptick in that after not following 9/11, baseball had such a unifying Piazza's home run off Steve Carsey has just such, and baseball was off for what, 10 days at that point. Such a unifying moment for all New Yorkers. To your point, like Dodger fans would root for the Giants in the World Series or vice versa. Felt like for the first time that Yankee fans are rooting for the Mets to win that first game back in New York after 9/11. And even some Met fans were rooting for the Yankees to win against the Diamondbacks to make it, 4 and 5 years and win the 2001 series. So as far as the social climate, New York again, it was more unified than it was certainly now, and even probably back in the 50s. And hopefully it's cyclical that there'll be another unifying moment that'll transcend sports and bring people closer together.
Thank you. That's what I'm kind of looking for.
Dave Lippman, you're up.
Okay. First off, I want to say that's a tremendous presentation, and that was a tremendous. I agree with you heartily about Americans not knowing their history. I've worked in public policy, and I've met people who don't know what the Gettysburg Address is, which blows my mind. My question to you is very simple: is the book available on Kindle?
Yes, yeah, it is available. If you go to Amazon, I think it's on Audible and all the various ebook and Kindle platforms. I'm hoping, which I'm in the process of doing now for my Nets book, is doing an audiobook version, but I don't want to jump the gun. I'd like to let the paperback and the Kindle version out for a little while before I do that.
Great.
Thank you, Dave. Paul Ellis Graham, you are up.
Oh, thank you, Gary. Thank you, Rick. That was really delightful. My question really involves rivalry, but not on a team level, but a personal level. Of all of you, the work that you did, are there two athletes on any of the opposing teams that really had it in for each other or intensely, whether it was professional or not, really at each other in terms of how one could outdo the other? Did anything stand out for you?
As far as whether it's Dodgers and Giants and Yankees, Mets, or
yeah, any of the different combinations of teams that played in New York from what you did.
From what I did, I'd say it was interesting because I don't know if it's really a rivalry, but it's funny. Like Bobby Valentine talks about the fact that he has framed on a wall in his house a note from George Steinbrenner, basically joking that he got an offer from Steinbrenner in the 80s to become manager, and he decided not to accept it. And the note basically says something to the effect of you should have taken the contract. And there was always kind of this undercurrent with Joe Torre that Jim Leyritz, who I interviewed in the book, talks about the home run he hit, of course, against Atlanta when they could have been down 3-1. And he hits that home run to bring them back from 6-0. And he talks about that year, and he talks about that basically Steinbrenner was ready to blow that team up after 97, and saying forget this, forget that. And Leyritz says that that home run that he hit, basically when Steinbrenner went off the rails, people remind him, hey, don't forget about 96. Let's not he wanted to trade Mariano. I want to trade this guy. And he said, no, just keep your cool. Let's run the course. And of course, 97 happens, the Marlins beating the Indians in 7. And then the Yankees, even though that historic season, they got off to kind of a slow start that year. And then, of course, had a historic, unbelievable record-setting year and sweep the Padres. But it's funny because there's always kind of an undercurrent. It felt like that Bobby Valentine, if he managed those Yankees teams, would have had as much success, if not more success, than Joe Torre with the talent that he had. So not that it's a bitter rivalry, but I definitely sense a little bit of an undercurrent there. That Joe always had the Goliath, and Bobby always had David.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot, Rick.
Thanks. Yep. Rick, we got about 5 more. Are we good for time?
Sure. Absolutely.
Terrific. Mr. Walsh, you are up. Unmute, Mike.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, Rick, I just wanted to clarify something with this phrase subway series. And I'm not from New York City, by the way. I'm from Philly. But I guess the phrase subway series really applies to any series, any games between two teams from New York City, right? Could be called a subway series. Like if they do interleague play nowadays, that's called, I think I've heard that called a subway series.
Right.
Is that true?
Yeah, in technicality, yes, but New York City was one of the first to have this intricate subway system. So it was
Sure,
best
sure.
known for that.
Yeah.
And then that's where I talk about like the Giants and the Dodgers when they moved, even when you consider the proximity of course, LA to San Francisco, it's not that interconnectedness with the boroughs. So again, I don't want to split hairs, but I would say it refers more. Anytime I think of subway series, I think of New York City. I guess you could say
Sure.
South Siders, North Siders, Chicago, but for some reason you don't really hear it referred to as that.
Okay. And your book focuses primarily on the World Series.
It does, but it
World
touches
Series
on
subway
yeah,
series,
the Giants.
right?
It does from Erskine, from his firsthand accounts. It does Dodgers and Giants and the shot heard around the world and that pennant race, and yeah, we'll touch on that and the Mayor's Trophy games as well.
The Mayor's Trophy, and that was an exhibition series between the Mets and the Yankees, in season exhibition game.
Well, and again, it had kind of a couple different iterations: 63 to 80, 82, 83, and then even before that, there were some games that were played in between intermittently.
Okay, but when they play now during the regular season, that is also called Subway Series.
Yeah, it's the Subway. It's interleague, but it's Subway Series, and then the MLB.
But it's not what you cover in your book necessarily. You're covering primarily World Series.
I actually, when I start getting to the later chapters, when it talks like 97 and on and past the 2000 Subway World Series, it covers all the regular season. I go in more in depth of the last 25 years of regular season meetings, like the iconic games from that era, from the last 25 years.
Yeah. Now, and what it really means, I suppose, is okay. So there's these two teams from New York City in the World Series, and so their fans are presumably taking the subway to the other team's stadium.
That's exactly right.
Or vice versa. That's essentially what we're talking about. Okay. Exactly. Now, wasn't there a season when the Mets and the Yankees played in the same stadium?
Well, again,
in the 70s.
Yeah, it would have been after. Yes, it was in the 70s. It was
of course, they didn't meet in the World Series, though,
1975.
right?
75, right? It was after the Mets lost to the Athletics in 73, and then shortly thereafter, a 2-year stint, I believe the Yankees were renovating and updating Yankee Stadium. They moved their offices, the ticket offices. I even wrote in the book, they had billboards on the LIE and the Major League and welcome Yankees, And the Mets, because they had some success with the 69 Miracle Mets, and of course 73 making the World Series. They didn't, not that they welcomed them with open arms, so they weren't as threatened by that. They were actually outdrawing the Yankees and doing better financially. So they did play together in such a short but sweet little moment, 2-year.
But
thing.
That season, that would have been cool if they had met in the World Series that season, right?
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I know that would have been I don't know what you would call it, the Stadium Series, maybe. I don't.
But I guess you could still call it the Subway Series because they would have still taken the subway to the same stadium for all the games, right? If they had actually met in the World Series, that would have been wild. Okay, that was my whole thing. That's
sure.
Just that phrase.
And Mike, you're in Pennsylvania. In that year, the Mets, the Yankees, the Giants, and the Jets all played at Shea Stadium. That field was totally beaten up. So, Renee,
the Giants, and the Giants in '76 moved to the Meadowlands, I believe. Right. Yes.
Okay.
Renee, you're up.
Thank you. Great seeing you, Rick. And I'm curious about your book. I can't wait to get it. I was from New York. I went through all that stuff with the Mets. How I got into it was my mom. My mom came to this country from Puerto Rico. She was a huge Willie Mays and Monty Irvin fan. I think a lot of people, or some people, know about this. I mentioned this some time ago, and she used to tell me stories about what Willie Mays did, Monty Irvin did, what the New York Giants were to fans of that team. So so growing up, I didn't see them play, but I followed them like Gary and everybody else because of Willie Mays and playing in San Francisco. But because they were a National League team, I jumped on the Mets when they were born. And later on became a season ticket holder. And everything you mentioned, remember, was a part of. There was a bunch of us, and I'm not talking about 10, I'm talking about more than 50 or 60, hated the word Subway Series during the regular season. We called it the Interborough Series. Subway Series, because of my mom, was the World Series, period. That was it. So when anybody would mention, oh, Subway Series, we'd basically turn away and just say, Interborough, idiot, Interborough. And people had no clue, and that said everything about history, about baseball history in New York, what the Subway Series meant.
You're probably not wrong there. I felt if I called it Interborough, Trolley Series, Subway Series, Stadium, I just for simplicity, for continuity.
No, but you know what? The trend, the culture was that. It's kind of the same thing when just excuse me for saying this, but fans of the Giants really felt hurt, just like the Dodger fans when they left, really hurt. But with that being said, we followed them to San Francisco.
Right.
The Giants had left us with a lot of history, a lot. I always boast to very few friends of mine who were Brooklyn Dodger fans when I was living in New York. You guys got nothing. All you got is that apartment complex. We got the stairs. We got pointing out all this stuff. There's real pride with the New York Giants. And I'll tell you this, been a season ticket holder for the Mets for a long time before giving it up. But I remember there was a game that they were honoring both the Dodgers and the Giants. I wore this cap because I still had it at the meet and greet. And what it was when you come to the turnstiles, pick your hat. And I grabbed the Giants hat. To my surprise, there was a few people who I knew very well had a great time that were Dodger fans. Oh my God, the wall that was brought up during that whole game. We talked to each other? Yeah. Were we really talking to each other? Not really. But that's what, and I was very fortunate to have a friend of mine who was a Yankee fan. I went to game 1 and game 3 because I had tickets to game 3 to the Worlds just to get that vibe of what it was like for my mom to hear stories about, when the Giants played the Yankees in '51, just to get that vibe. I miss her. She's passed away quite a number of years ago. But a lot of these guys with bringing up the Subway Series brought me back to my mom. That's basically what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Sorry for your loss.
Mr. Dixie.
Thank you. Great stuff, Rick. I have 2 totally unrelated questions.
Sure.
The first one is, when you were doing research in the 20s for the very first 3-year series between the Yankees and the Giants, did you find anything particularly interesting while you were doing it? And the second question is, was the fact that you already had 90% of the book finished a selling point to your second publisher?
First question first. Yeah, I found it interesting that the game. So in the first meeting when the game was supposed to be suspended on account of darkness, right, where they basically ruled it a tie, where they changed that rule to say that now you would pick up that game at a later date to play it out, and that opened Pandora's box to say that now this was a conspiracy, that the game was either being thrown or the commissioner's office was in bed with the bettors, and then they ended up donating the proceeds from that game to World War I charity. So I thought that was pretty interesting, of course. And then Babe Ruth being injured and coming back into that series and having an impact was something I didn't really, just like the Jackie Robinson you mentioned in game 7, not starting. Those are kind of those little lesser known facts in Major League Baseball history that unless you've read countless books or, historians like you happen to be, you wouldn't know that. So I found that pretty interesting. And I knew the extent, and again, I knew from reading baseball almanacs growing up and reading books about the history of the Giants. I just didn't know the extent of their dominance in the early part of the 20th century, and that kind of the other part that I thought was interesting was about the Yankees being lessees at the Polo Grounds, and then basically serving them an eviction notice, and there was some kind of bad blood, but then they rescinded it, and then the Yankees go and build what was at that time I think $1 million they spent on Yankee Stadium. It's built within less than a year, which I couldn't even fathom with 50,000 seats. I thought all that was like really, really fascinating. I thought it was kind of a leap of faith, from the Highlanders to those early years of the Yankees, like to just assume that when an already an established market that had at the time a Brooklyn team and a Giants team, that you were going to be able to fill that building, I thought was like, a little aggressive and ambitious, but obviously it worked. And then I'm sorry, your second question again?
About whether having 90% of the book done was a selling point.
I mean, maybe a better question for my editor. I think so. Again, I having lived through the beginning of the modern era from 97, I can recall virtually every game from 97 on, if not, from the early 90s on. I basically the early part of the book, which is the crux of it, the golden era, if you want to call it that, was the most research intensive for me, and relying on firsthand accounts from Carl Erskine and Susan Waldman and Ed Randall and so on and so forth. So the fact that I had 90% of it done was really, I had a leg up, but I felt bad for the Garys of the world, or David German, who's, on this call as well. I kept, kind of trying to hype up and talk about the excitement of this book, and everyone's like, well, when the hell is it coming? Because we went through a cancellation kind of phase, but yeah, it was a long road, but at the end, I'm happy where it ended up. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Dixie. Francis, you're up. Francis.
I have a question or comment after
Yeah,
Francis.
Howard after Francis.
Yeah.
Francis, you're up.
Yes, I just wanted to ask about the movement of Sal Magley, because he played for all three of these New York teams, Dodgers, Giants, and the Yankees. How did that go over well with Magley? And if you know, I realize this predated your birth, perhaps, but how Magley felt about that, and how he was accepted by players on teams that he had played very hard against previously.
You ask an interesting question, and one that I would love to have covered more in the book in depth. But like I said, I had to pick and choose my spots. I had like a word count mandate from my publisher, 80,000 words, max. And I was like really pushing up against that. So I could have went to a bunch of different tangents and side stories. I didn't really get into that a lot, but yeah, I mean, he was obviously wore all three of those ball caps. Didn't get into the interpersonal relationships or certainly include interviews from whether he identified more as a Dodger, a Giant, or a Yankee. But he certainly was a staple and a fixture of those Subway Series era teams. And again, it was like every other, and I do cover not pitch by pitch, but really, big moments in the World Series where those three teams faced off against one another. I cover in depth, and without fail, Sal's name is in there throughout that whole, 13, 14-year period. Which I found pretty fascinating. And again, if you're a casual baseball observer, you know a little bit about the history of New York baseball. He's not always the first pitcher or player you think of, but to your point, yeah, I mean, he played not just a role, but an integral role with all three of those teams.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I hope that answered your questions.
Well, yes. Well, it would probably be interesting if we could talk to him about it.
Right, exactly.
Francis, there's a really good book by Judith Testa on Sal Magley, if you haven't read it yet. So
yes. Thank you.
Howard, you're gonna wrap it up tonight.
Yeah, hi, Rick. I just have a little story to tell you. I was at the 1965 Mayor's Trophy game at Yankee Stadium. I believe it was a Wednesday night, and we didn't take the subway. We drove from Queens. My father drove. My older brother was with us, my father's business partner, and his son was my brother's age. So I remember very little about the game. I think Jimmy Pearsall got a big hit in that game. I seem to remember that. But what made that night interesting for us, and I have a little different take on it than everybody else here, after the game, we couldn't find our car. Our car was stolen during the Mayor's Trophy game. And that's why I remember that night so well. We ended up spending something like 3 hours in the 44th Street precinct. Which was located along the Deegan Expressway near the GW Bridge. And as a 12-year-old kid who was in junior high, I was looking forward to something like Car 54, Where Are You? With Captain Block and Goody. And it wasn't quite like that. But we got 2 a.m. It was a little night for me, so you could appreciate this. I was in 7th grade, junior high, and I don't know how I got up the next morning. It was really tough. And they did find the car a week later, totally stripped in a junkyard in Jackson Heights, Queens. So that was my memory of my one and only Mayor's Trophy game.
Fascinating. Funny.
Does anybody not know how to raise their hand, or new people who need to ask a question who don't know how to raise their hand?
I used to be able to do it. It disappeared on me. Can't do it anymore.
I don't know, Howard. We got to work on
With
that.
my wife,
Anyway,
who's an expert, can't figure it
again,
out.
We had the
new
Bay
book
Bridge
out by Rick
series.
Laughland. Rick, best way to get the book?
Probably on Amazon is easiest for everybody, I'm assuming, or barnesandnoble.com, or you can email me, and I do have a handful of author copies I could sign and send out to you as well.
Wonderful. Why don't we all give it up for Rick Laughland? Rick,
Yay.
best of luck with the book. I hope
Thank
you hit
you
a
for-
home run, and I'm
Thank
sure
you for your
will.
patience, Gary. Sorry this took forever.
Stop. The great presentation
Good job.
tonight. We will reconvene in 2 weeks. 2 weeks on the following Thursday with Brad Mangan. So until then, happy Valentine's, everybody. And I'm going to shut the recording off. Anybody wants to hang around, talk Giant baseball, we are here.
We